So welcome to Machine Unlearning, Decolonial Thinking in the Age of AI, which is a special session of the course, The Political Archeology of Data at the Hochschule für Gestaltung in Karlsruhe. My name is Arif Kornweitz. I'm a PhD student here at KIM, at the Research Group for AI and Media Philosophy at the University for Arts and Design. My pronouns are he and him. And our guest today is Kader Attia. I will briefly introduce him and also introduce our host, Matteo Pasquinelli. And then I will give the word to Kader and Matteo. So Kader is joining us. He's an artist and curator, studied philosophy and art in Barcelona and in Paris, where he has founded La Colonie, a space for the exchange of ideas and discussions, focusing on not only the decolonization of people, but also of knowledge and practices. Kader has recently been appointed the curator of the Berlin Biennale that will take place from June to September this year. And I remember first seeing Kader's work in 2009 in London at Saatchi, but it has been shown at various places. It has been shown at Documenta 13, at the Havana Biennale, the Venice Biennale in Sharjah, the MoMA in New York, but also in the ZKM in Karlsruhe, where some of us are right now. So in his practice, Kader has worked extensively with the concept of repair, a concept that has allowed him to investigate a dialectic between destruction and social cultural reparation. So repair is understood as a way of cultural resistance and as well as a means for reappropriating history and identity. And our second speaker and usual host of this session at the HfG is Matteo Pasquinelli. Matteo is a professor in media philosophy here at the Hochschule, and his research focuses on the intersection of cognitive science, digital economy, and machine intelligence. And Matteo is currently preparing a monograph on the history of AI, titled The Eye of the Master, a labor theory of artificial intelligence for Verso books, out soon, I hear. So before we start, I'm the moderator today. For the people that are joining now, my name is Arif, and we'll have a program of about 45 minutes, which is a conversation between Kader and Matteo. And then we have quite some time for questions. You can write them in the chat, or you'll also be able to pose them yourself. I just want to come briefly back to the title of the session today, which is Machine Unlearning, Decolonial Thinking in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, which is very dense, and I'm looking forward to unpack it, to seeing it being unpacked. I just want to say maybe one thing for the people that are less familiar with the term artificial intelligence, and that is that I like to point out that artificial simply means produced by human beings, and that may be also a nice pointer towards the conversation that we're about to hear. So to start off, I would like to ask you, Matteo, if you could tell us how the idea to have this conversation with Kader developed.
Great. Thanks, Arif, for this conversation and for hosting this event today. I think we are our guests of you. Yeah, this was born as a sort of informal conversation in between me and Kader, and then it became something else. I think Kader had the idea many months ago, then it changed, and we ended up today hosting this thing here at HfG Karlsruhe, virtually speaking. I hope also the last event that we have to do online, so we hope in the future and in the upcoming summer semester we move to teach and to organize events like this in presence. And yeah, I would like to go back to our initial idea. I think Kader once mentioned to me his interest in the new form of data governance, algorithmic governance in the technical and political constitution of the present, so saturated by technology. On my side, I have, after studying media philosophy, artificial intelligence, data computer science epistemology for so many years, I had the interest finally to also investigate alternative epistemologies. I've been always interested in alternative epistemologies. I've been always interested in decolonial, feminist, historical epistemologies. I never studied AI because I think is a good thing, or I'm interested. I always wanted to study artificial intelligence and the data infrastructure of the present because they are an urgent political issue. And so we had this idea then to meet and and to have a kind of very sincere and human and frank exchange about not about us as authors, but I would say about two different communities, two different circles of practices, people interested in media philosophy and in the politics of media, and people coming from art practice, curatorial practice, studies in also decolonial anti-psychiatric movement. My question to start this conversation for Kader is precisely about this. What I found always interesting in his work is this engagement with the affective dimension of the collective mind, Kader, and especially the colonial traumas that constitute the European psyche and the psyche of migrant communities, the unconscious of all of us. And you've been working on this dimension of healing, of repair, but also on art and practice as a medium of healing. And you've been, from what I understood, what I've been following so far, you've been studying and following very closely the tradition of anti-psychiatric and decolonial struggles, and where we can mention Fanon among many other authors. But at a certain point of this research, you also encounter the vast infrastructure of digital communication and data monopolies, the technical composition of the present. You encounter digital networks that are at the same time forms of communication and surveillance today. And with this notorious algorithm that control everything of our life, from labor to social life, but also emotional life. So Kader, indeed, my question to start today would be, where is this interest for the digital sphere coming from? How you perceive it from the point of view of your life and your practice as artist and curator? I think now we have to unmute Kader, Arif.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Arif. Thank you, Matteo. Thanks to all of you. It's a very, of course, important question, because those topics are, I would say, quite serious. Particularly, I'm thinking here about the psychiatry and the anti-psychiatry. And indeed, one could wonder why someone would be interested by both the digital world and the world of psychiatry. And basically, I would say first that why I am extremely interested by addressing the question of computational governance today is because the more I'm like first digging or deepening my researches for more than 5 years now, the more I find similar the regime of coloniality and the computational governance. The more I find similar the colonialism and digital governance. And so before to speak about the relation, I could try to elaborate between anti-psychiatry, psychiatry, and digital governance. I would say that first, we have to understand how the digital economy is actually working on the continuum of colonialism. And as far as I'm concerned, of course, there are many examples, and Matteo, I think we know many of them, particularly what Shoshana Zuboff has developed as extractions of behavioral surplus in capitalism surveillance. But there are other aspects that for me are even in terms of this coloniality, which, just to finish with Zuboff, what I found interesting is the fact that, for instance, most of the GAMFA today, and have been defending, even Eric Schmidt from Google and Larry Page have been defending the idea that they were discovering the behavioral surplus, which is quite similar with the rhetoric of colonialism of the New World, of so-called America, discovered by the European. There was a world here. The behavioral surplus exists before the GAMFA, before the UPA algorithm has been registered in 2003. So for me, what interests me in this sort of similarity is, I would say, the agency that moves this computational governance. So then we have to indeed take this quite seriously, because when we understand that we are still dealing with the consequences of colonialism, the disaster produced by colonialism today, I think we should definitely pay more attention to the way the computational governance is like continuing this. I call it agency. We can name it in so many ways. But this sort of continuum of extractions of wealth that became sometimes irreparable in some cultures. And for instance, for me, there's something that is very interesting in this, and that's why I like the fact that you bind this with the question of mental health, is that basically one of the major consequences of computational governance hegemony is mental health. And it's completely taken for granted by the majority of people that it is not. Like Bernard Stiegler used to say, the most dangerous technology are the invisible one, and because they are the most efficient. We could speak about this the way Zuboff has like described it, but there are also other much more complex ways that I think we should elaborate here. Bernard Stiegler really struck me when using Gilbert Simondon's concept of collective individuation, has explained that basically the externalization of memory produced by the human subject, and once called by Michel Foucault hypomenatas concept, object, has become in a reticular economy tertiary retentions, so digital memories. And out of these, I mean, from these digital memories, from these tertiary digital retentions, the computational governance is actually producing protension to the human subjects. So basically it's producing the expectation at the speed of light, I'm talking here, transforming the expectation, then the protensions of each human subject that we are. How? Maintaining them in a hijacking basically this trans-individuation process that makes human subject through an individual, a psychic individuation and a collective individuation, a human group that evolves. And I think this is very, very important to understand in relation with mental health, because I'm not only worried by the fact that the mankind today is maintained in a state of hypnosis by computational governance, that he's like constantly extracting through impulse and addiction data, but by the same process destroying desire. I'm also thinking, and here I'm quoting Bernard Stiegler again, that maybe the only way to stand against that is to reappropriate our dream. What Stiegler says, I'm quoting him, is to desautomatize our dreams, because our dreams are automatized. What is colonialism? Colonialism is a dream imposed on the other. When you go down the street of Didouche Morad in Algiers, I've been fascinated for years by modern architecture. The Didouche Morad Street is probably the longest of Algiers. It goes almost from the top, and then you just walk down, and you have the whole city and layer of history of this dream, this colonial dream in front of you. It's like a traveling movement that you are doing just by walking. You are basically walking in the dream of someone else, of a colonizer. Colonialism imposes a dream to the other. And to get rid of that, like I have this book here by Abdelkabir Khatibi, which I really advise to many people, who was for me the first to speak about decolonization of the self in 1970. To get rid of this colonization of your imagination, you need more than a physical independence, you know. You're not speaking about an occupation of the land here only. Of course, there is also. We are speaking about how much the process of domination from one force to another, and that has been basically elaborated within a modern capitalistic project, colonialism, is a process that imposes a dream to the others. And another, I mean, I don't have the book here, but I'm thinking also about Joseph Tonda, the Gabonese writer, who I think is here. Yeah. Another book I really advise to you is Afro-Dystopie. Afro-Dystopie by Joseph Tonda. To live in the dream of another. La vie dans le rêve d'autrui. The whole question, the whole critical question about colonial legacy for Joseph Tonda is that there is an Afro-dystopy which has been created from the dream of someone else, basically the colonizer, imposed on the colonized subject. So there is definitely more than a similarity. It's even a kind of very complex correlation, I would say, that do exist between digital governance and mental health. I mean,
I think you have already give us two fantastic concepts. I like a lot this idea of the automation of dreams, this dimension that probably few psychoanalysts started to be aware of, the relation between technology and our inner life. But you actually suggested something else that I found extremely interesting. That is this idea of de-automatization, somehow the effort to reverse the automation process. And this is for me a key issue, because even critical thought always develop theory of automation, but we never develop a theory of de-automation. And I think this is what we have to work on today. And I remember, because you mentioned Bernard Stiegler, Stiegler had this notion that we discussed already, I think, another time, this idea of grammatization. So the effect of the technical sphere as an effect of grammatization, that in English we could translate as encoding of our language in the language of technology. But Stiegler also associated this to another process. It was the process that he called himself proletarization. So for him, grammatization and proletarization, that was basically the impoverishment of a good part of the social classes, were going together. But I think this is just a proposal that it comes to my mind now. We have to take this concept, but also think to alternatives, and maybe to think also to strategy of empowerment. So when we think about strategy of de-automation, I think that indeed this process of encoding indeed can be somehow utopianly, probably optimistically from my point of view, reappropriated. This is, of course, a gigantic effort. How can we, put our hands on the technological infrastructure today, reappropriate or reverse these processes? But I like a lot this idea of the automation, because I think we don't have a theory, we don't have a discourse, and we should expand on that. I have myself developed a theory of automation from below, starting from the division of labor, starting from social process. And I think what we need probably is also a new theory of invention, a new theory of the relation with technology that is could be even non-technological. But if you don't mind, Kader, I would like to bring other bad news for the history of this data infrastructure. That is indeed what is the colonial unconscious, the colonial origin of these technologies. And especially what we studied also in this course, that are the techniques of machine learning, the techniques of artificial intelligence that emerge from a kind of colonial mathematical view of society to a view of society based on segregation. And what is striking for me that both statistics and machine learning, for instance, they emerge at the end of the 19th century with craniometry. This idea to measure the skull of people and to build for the first time a correlation between the intelligence of people and the size of the skull. The agenda was completely, based on racial segregation, was a racist agenda, but that technique, the technique of correlation, was born there, was multiplied, craniometry became psychometric, psychometric was applied to machine learning, and that then was exploded by machine learning today. So I see in the algorithm of AI today, the algorithm of machine learning, of course, mathematics, statistics per se can be used for different purposes, but strangely, the origin is extremely racist. So, going back to what you said about the automation of our dreams, the automation of our mind, I think also the authors that you just mentioned, these books and your work, refer to this great tradition that I encounter myself in the French-speaking sphere, anti-psychiatric philosophy, anti-authoritarian social movement, and the philosophy, specifically the French philosophy, that follow this tendency. And I think of authors like indeed Fanon, but also Foucault, Deleuze, and Guattari, and a whole library of books dedicated to the history of madness, to the history of schizophrenia, to basically to the deconstruction of the normative institution of French modernity. It was like so happy to divide people with normal minds and people with abnormal minds. And I'm very happy about your work, because that tradition somehow today I see it becoming minoritarian, and I see this age obsessed with intelligence, but with, of course, a mechanic measurement of intelligence, with a mathematical measurement of intelligence. And I think it's time to, to rediscover, probably to go back or to continue this tradition of anti-psychiatric, of philosophy of the abnormal mind. So I prepared this question for you that I encapsulate in this line. What happened to the philosophy, to the theory of the abnormal mind in the age of artificial intelligence? And
yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that if I see it from my experience, talking about anti-psychiatry on the ground, it really reminds me a dear friend I lost a few months ago, the Senegalese professor Momargueye, who was the first to introduce what Devereuxian called ethnopsychiatry, or tradi therapy, from tradition, tradi therapy, in the psychiatric hospital of Fan in Dakar. He did introduce a ritual that comes from a group of people called the Serrers. They are fishermen people, and they do practice a ritual to heal schizophrenia, which involves a sacrifice, trance, and which aim is like to either help the subject to get rid of the possession of his body by a spirit, or to anyway to heal him or her. And I think Momargueye really nailed it when he told me once, when you are he worked 35 years in this hospital, and he said, when you spend 35 years in the same house, you have spent so much time with some patients that you discover that basically in their so-called madness, they are very coherent. So sometimes we think mad are mad, but we are very far to be normal. This is the statement of Omar. And for me, this notion of abnormality is definitely linked to one of the most radical and powerful trick of colonial modernity, which is the enunciation. Who is normal? Who is abnormal? And that's why when I read the question, I think this is tricky in the question, because I would not use this terminology of normality and abnormality, but rather the question of the locus from where we are talking. I think this question is definitely part of a locus that is a Western mind question. If you reverse it somewhere in the world and in another culture, I'm not sure it will be, the term will be adequate. Because, you know, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Yeah, because I just had a sign which says you are disconnected, but you can hear me, right?
Yeah, very well.
I'm still thinking that to come back to Montmargay, another thing he told me very important. He said, you know, when the white psychiatrists came here in Senegal, he watched basically the West African subject spending his day outside, lying on the baobab, playing tam-tam and being very happy. He thought he did not have an unconsciousness. And I'm quoting Montmargay. And he said, of course he thought so, because he never went beyond that image. He never tried to understand how this society were working. And this society had structure to care about mental health. Like always, like all societies. They had the marabout, they had the priest. Even the marabout is a healer, basically, but he's a healer whose practice is to listen to the community when someone comes and said, I don't feel good, I'm possessed, I don't know what I am, etc. The person knows the context, the locus from where the conversation is happening. And that's why I think, for me, the question of normality and abnormality belongs much more to a geography, basically. And then if we figure out the way that what I was saying before about the way that computational governance is constantly hijacking our trans-individuation processes, basically hijacking our dreams, we can consider that we are mad, because we are actually maintained in a sort of schizophrenic world that is the connected world. And I would even add here that this is just the beginning, because with the Internet of Things, there won't be any more the screen like the one we are using now. Everything will be connected. The glass will be connected, everything, the bath will be connected, the shoes will be connected. And I think this fragmentation of the subjectivity that is produced by the huge, the endless schizophrenia that the virtual world is providing, it is, I would say, at some point, much closer to what Montmargay was talking about in terms of marabout than to the world we believe we live in. So, like Tarek al-Harith, I really like this theory of Tarek al-Harith, who wrote a book on the way that the leaks and the Twitters during at the moment where ISIS was very, very, very powerful in the Middle East, were very much, I mean, the language, the myth they were evoking, like the rule, which are in Islamic, in pre-Islamic culture, are half animal, half human creature, like the Sphinx, etc. Sounds like what was what was preceding modernity is going back, but through the internet, through not the internet. I don't think the internet will I think it will disappear, but through the virtual technology. And that's why I think it's a question of a locus, and the question is interesting, but we need to make it, we need to merge normality and abnormal. I think it's the same world, the same word.
Yeah, you mentioned this fatal dialectics of the digital, you know, the return of the archaic, the return of archaic forces through what looks like the most futuristic paradigm, the most futuristic infrastructure. And this is part of a key issue. But I would like to clarify indeed where the terms come. Indeed, if we talk today still of normalization, of the abnormal and the normal, is because of the French post-revolutionary, after Napoleon started processes to normalize and standardize French society. So our term of today, the normal, and also the abnormal, go back to that period. But indeed, they contain a process of normalization, Foucault would say. But I like and remember very much this statement by Georges Canguilhem, that wrote an important book on the history of the normal and the abnormal, when he said that the abnormal, in spite of the fact that looks logically first, is existentially first. So the abnormal comes before the normal. And this is the way I was thinking to mobilize it, and the way. But then, of course, in also this theory of our mind, there are like theory that, like the one of Deleuze and Guattari, for instance, their idea of schizophrenia was not just somehow a kind of celebration of schizophrenia, it was indeed pointed to the fact that capitalism itself is able somehow to capture these schizophrenic forces and recompose them. And you brought this example indeed of the fact that our ego, our mind today, is schizophrenic, decomposed in this fractal dimension of metadata and fragments of information that compose our virtual body. And this is a form of, indeed, if not schizophrenia. I have, please, Kader. Kader is muted again, Arif. I think we have to unmute Kader.
Yep. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Matteo. I really appreciate your precision, but also talking about this metadata universe, I would like also even to underline probably another aspect that is even more concerning, which is the hyperproletarization that is happening today. In the sense, of course, that a Stiglerian sense, proletarization has the loss of knowledge. Because what was the most concerning for Bernard Stiegler in the Automata Society was the end of theory, basically. And I think what is interesting in your question of normal, abnormal is also this need to maintain and as a philosopher, you will of course not contradict this, the need for critique. And the problem of this governance and its hegemony is that it's actually normalizing the abnormal. So there's no need to address, from the zombies that we have become hypnotized by this process of extractions, which is not extraction, is actually walking at the speed of light, transformation of us, because we receive the protension, etc. I think this question of hyperproletarization for me is very concerning, and I really wanted to answer to you because there is also within this meta data context, the hyperproletarization, this extreme, insane, extraordinary speed of interaction, because it works at the speed of light. Another need that binds us to what I was saying in regarding the automatization of the dreams. And these bring us also to art, I think. It's the need to reinvent tools that slow time. It's the need to understand that an artwork basically slow time. the extraordinary capacity of an artwork is that it just slow time when you get in front of something. And I think Stigler did not speak about that, but as far as I'm concerned now, I'm really like very much caring about this. I think it was, I read this first by I have to give him the credit, Damien Bougnou. He's a French mediologist. And I think he says an artwork, any artwork has this extraordinary capacity to slow time. I cannot agree more. It can be, it's just a proposal. Maybe we are wrong, but this is the interest of our time now. We also need to, you know, try to dissecate these extremely complex and dense processes of colonization to find a way to stand against it.
This is perfectly, you know, one of the theory of de-automation that we were looking for, because if automation officially defined is a technique to save time, is a technique to accelerate the process of labor and the division of labor itself, you know, indeed, if we want to contrast automation in that sense, we have to find indeed probably other time dimension, other chronograms, other indeed ontologies of time. This connects to another interest they had, myself, Kader, about this alternative epistemology. Going back also to this idea that I know of Bernard Stiegler of a loss of knowledge. These processes of encoding, grammatization, pervasive datification of everything, it's a way to absorb our knowledge, our intelligence. I think machine learning, artificial intelligence in this is a fantastic example. It's a new, very efficient universal machine able to absorb and encode large repository of cultural heritage. You know, it can be extremely useful in terms of translation, we know that, but also is a very almost monopolistic attitude towards our cultural heritage. And we can discuss this, and this for me is one of the key political issue in today, cultural heritage and politics of culture. But my interest is, okay, we have a lot of knowledge, but we have to think, you know, what are the alternative? And indeed, in this moment of extreme digital saturation and saturation of algorithm like the one of machine learning, I'm interested in indeed in the role of art, of our school, of education, of community practices, other way of thinking that are not algorithmic. And you just mentioned art with this idea of slowing down time. But one thing that I think is just absolutely important to remember is also that great experiment that was La Colonie. So I take La Colonie as one of the way we should, as an example, but we can bring others, you know, from our friends in other cities. An example of a counter epistemology, you know, as a new way of producing knowledge, as a way of producing knowledge that is not following this sort of standards that you just mentioned of grammatization that are imposed on us. And it would be great, I don't know if you agree, if you could discuss indeed La Colonie or any other proposal you have in mind, any other community. And I stress the word community because here is not the endeavor of a single author of the individual artist or individual philosopher, but has to be indeed a collective project, a political project.
I mean, the La Colonie project was, I would say, extremely important physically because the idea, the initial idea was, I mean, came beginning in 2010, I think. So at that time, we were not speaking that much about decolonial conversations and the need for this, particularly in France. And the idea was to just create the space for that. So it's completely different, of course, with what we are doing today. Even though we are together, we are virtually together. Being in the same space is not the same thing. To have, I don't know, people like Balibar or Negri or Françoise Vergès or Stefania Pandolfo, I don't know. Some of them friends, some other I don't know them, Bruno Latour, Martha Rosler, in the space with also anonymous people taking the mic, addressing and arguing them. I mean, I remember Balibar was very much enjoying this. He said, this is what we dream at the university. But I would say that I really hope that we get quickly rid of this sort of shitty pandemic, because even if we will be 20 people in a small place, the individuation, the collective individuation is very, very, is actually much more productive than staying on network. But then, if we think about a time when we don't have choice and we need to use technology, because again, I think that technology is a pharmacon. It's not only, it's bad, but it's good also. I remember an article by Yukui and someone else, sorry, I forgot the other guy, from 2017, I think, on collective individuation. Basically, it's an article that, basically, it's a kind of copy and paste of Gilbert Simondon, I would say, except that it's kind of interesting in the sense that it helped me to meet a data scientist here in Berlin, Luca Fuchsgruber, with whom he didn't know about the article, and then we met in a park, blah, blah. We find so many interests together, and he told me that there are technically possibility to create alternative network than Facebook and Twitter and blah, blah, blah. Using open source system, you can create a network of, I don't know, 20 people until 50,000 people. So I'm not saying that we need to meet physically. This is for sure we need to meet physically. It's very important. The common ground happens in this gregarious, process. But at the same time, I think we also need to reappropriate what was initially digital technology, basically a tool for activists to create political movement. We've been, I mean, the whole digital technology has been completely taken over by capitalism. And we know that. Of course, for us today, it sounds obvious, but in 1999, it was not that obvious. I remember very well. So, I mean, I remember very well the people I was talking about internet, beginning of 2000 in Paris, they were like super far left activists thinking that this was the future. So you see, it's a question of, I mean, yeah, we need to believe, we need to Matteo, to be honest, to finish with, I'm maybe one of my strength, if I may to say so, is that I never really separate what sounds like very brand sort of edgy, technologically speaking, to what is not. Collect of data has been existing much before digital technology. If you look at the drawings of Paul Gauguin, the painter, or Émile Nolde when he was in Papua Guinea, all these drawings that we love to see in museums, they're beautiful, by modern artists on non-Western colonized subjects. These are collective data, because what they are showing are people weaving, people fishing, people hunting, people sleeping. These have been used by the Wissenschaft, by human sciences Abi Warburg, The Ritual of the Snake, which I really love, is actually a book that is inspired by many other ethnographic trips in the region of Hopi people in America, in New Mexico, since the end of the 19th century. And the book of the Conference of Warburg, I think, was given in the 20s. So there is a whole story that precedes data governance that makes that we need to include when we have to think about this virtual technology as a pharmacon. And I was about to continue on justice, but maybe we can speak about this later.
Yes, I think maybe, Kader, I don't know how you feel, but maybe we could open to questions now if we were like precisely, no? Would you mind, Kader, to receive more questions from the audience at this point? I think you're muted.
Yeah. There was an interesting question that maybe the audience will enjoy. Tell me what you think, Matteo. I don't want to take too long the mic. It was, how do you see the relation between data surveillance, capitalism, and justice today, from your point of view?
Yeah.
I think this is important.
We can go back to that.
Okay.
Yes, no, indeed, that was part of this debate on this gigantic mega machine of control today. Yeah, I prepared that final question that is precisely, I think we don't have to repeat that, today digital capitalism is the extraction of information and data from our individual and collective behaviors. I think we are all aware of this. Probably we were not aware of this in the 90s when the internet was the beginning, but now we see basically this new ontology of data and digital networks. And many authors, like you mentioned, Zuboff, have been covering this case. And I would say this COVID pandemic is a great tragic example of this governance by numbers and infrastructure that have been set up to basically control the population, not any longer with institution, but with flows of metadata and app that basically they track us all the time. But yeah, indeed, my question for you, how do you say this in relation to what is how do you say the relation between this regime of data surveillance, the economic regime of capitalism, and the issue of justice today? Because I think that the issue of justice is always present, especially in your work, and you want to go back to that every time, I think.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a notice on this, but I'm going to answer now because it's also, I think, something I really find crucial today, talking about. As you said, I completely agree with you regarding the data extraction. We spoke about this. There are many authors. It's justice and digital is not about that. Justice and digital, at first, there is this book by Roa Benjamin, Race After Technology, which I think is extremely important to understand that because machine learning based algorithms are data dependent, if the data are biased, the software will likely yield biased results. What Roa Benjamin is explaining binds us also to coloniality. That's why I was mentioning artists who have been part, maybe, of course, without knowing it, of this colonial extraction of information on the colonized subject. But the Jim Crow process do continue today within the algorithmic, the black box, basically. And there are two examples I really wanted to mention here for those who do not know. A couple of years ago, the American justice system has ordered to a data scientist company, a software to manage trials, basically. So algorithm becoming juror. It was called Compass. I don't know if you heard about this, Matteo. And Compass, after 2 years, have become, took them 2 years to wake up and discover that basically this software was condemned in black and brown people before white. So first there is this, again, continuum of the bias that have been existing, particularly in the US, which is a society that has 200 years of white supremacy and racism based on slavery, etc. But there's another thing that is much more concerning, is the way that there is a kind of agency, Matteo, in digital technology that is slowly spreading into fields of research and works that do not allow gamification. Is this gaming culture that do exist in technology, in digital technology? I'm thinking here about another software company called Kleros, which is basically creating online trials, court, where jurors can participate if they pay with Ethereum. And the more they win cases, the more they get incomes. But we talk about real trials. So the gamification of justice that is now happening with a company that is supported by the European Union, etc., is actually what is, I would say, more concerning in terms of basically the blockchain governance that is articulated with only smart contracts, basically. So we are actually giving up on this famous trans-individuation Stigler was talking, where from a state of fact to a state of right, there was basically the human experience to decide who is guilty, who is not, to listen a defendant, but rather making it for economical reason, or let's say hijacking, shortcutting this whole much needed conversation into an algorithmic statistic ranking process that, as we know, is not 100% reliable at all. So that, but we take it for granted always that is reliable. This is also so for me, the question of justice has two aspects. On the one hand, what is extremely scary is this continuity of racism and bias. And on the other hand, is that by itself, virtual technology is moved by this sort of so-called philosophy of happiness, of ease, of game, and this is something that we should be aware and yes, this is it. So let's continue, Matteo. Now maybe we can take some question.
Yeah, thanks. I think there, yeah, we are a lot of people today. I will suggest that indeed, who has a questions, and Arif can help me here with the moderation, can write the question in the chat, and then maybe we pick up a question. But Arif, I would suggest to start with Bettina Zemma and invite her maybe to pick up the microphone and make a direct question to everyone.
Yeah, I will also read questions, so everyone can post questions in the chat, and then maybe we will call people and invite them to also join the conversation. I think Bettina's question, I'll read in a second, is also a question that I wanted to jump towards, I guess, because Kader said that dreams are automated and colonialism is essentially the imposing of a dream on the other. And I also know that elsewhere, Kader, you said that artists have the kind of ability or possibility to think by creating an ellipsis, and I guess that could be a way to kind of break this path of an enforced dream, let's say. And I felt that also Bettina's question is related to this. Bettina, would you like to read your question or to join us?
Hi. Yes. Hello. I'm just going to put on the microphone. I'm here in Senegal in oh, I have no background from here. I'm in Senegal in a permacultural project, and very happy to join was by coincidence through the gallery of Kader that I got notified, and just 1 hour ago. Yes, I always think about the artist also as documentator, and my question was, can an artist today be like Gauguin and just, record something without using a colonial eye? How can we get out of the trap of seeing the people here, for example, as the other? I'm very interested also in this area, religion, which has also matrilineal and patrilineal streak. And I heard about the Marabout, and I was asking about the women who keep the sacred knowledge and so on. So there are many interests I have here, but also throughout my life, I always was interested in this question. Is that clear? More or less?
Thank you, Bettina. Should I answer, Matteo? Or?
Yes, please, Kader. Yeah, I think is.
Thank you, Bettina. Well, I mean, first of all, I think if you are already wondering such question, I think you are on the good path, because like Khatibi said in his La Mémoire Tatouée, you know, the book I was showing before, is actually an author who, end of the 60s, after Morocco got its independence, was already thinking about the needs of, after the independence, the real crucial process of decolonial thinking is to decolonize yourself. So the first thing you have to do also, we have to think about, if I may so, Bettina, we can speak later about this if you want, but I think it's very important to think about this question of first decolonize yourself. And the difficulty when you are in Senegal or anywhere else, I love Senegal, but is and in Algeria, I think Kli was in Tunisia, is indeed, it's not about what you are collecting, I would say. It's about yourself. It's about deeply yourself, you know. And what I would suggest, because I'm half artist and half activist, half curator, half someone who takes the reality as a concrete stake, you should also develop project there with people that, because I know Senegal, there are many interesting people, there are many interesting conversations and project and poets, etc., and theater, like Massamba Gueye, who ran this very little school of theater out of Dakar. And I think for me, or Americans, if you know them, the School of Mutants, they are the most interesting is not necessarily to take something, but to share something with other people that would concretely take shape there as a concept or as a physical project. But yeah, this is what I want to say. And to finish with, you know, do what you want. I'm just me. I mean, I don't have any, I can just give you my opinion. They are not advice. I think your question is already very good, because not many people are wondering this when they are in Africa.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid that we don't have time for follow-up questions, so I will move on to Mariana's question, who is one of our colleagues. And I think, Mariana, your internet connection is a bit poor, so I'll just read the question. So Mariana was wondering if the both of you could expand on whether the concept of trauma plays a role in your work, and if so, what your working conception of that concept is. And also whether you see a common interest between how you approach the theme and how it intersects simultaneously with the history of technology, psychology, colonialism in both of your works. And I propose that Matteo maybe could make a start.
Yeah, this is thanks, Arif, but this is a big topic. I think I remember when both me and Kader, we traveled to Saskatchewan, that was the center of Canada, for a lecture organized by eFlux. And I think we were both talking about phantom limbs at the time, or something similar, if I remember correctly. And that goes back to our common interest, probably. But what is interesting for me, that early 20th century neurology, but also cybernetics, had very sophisticated models of the mind. So today we are familiar with the idea of neuroplasticity, the idea that the brain can repair itself after, for instance, a trauma. But at the origin of this, of the German neurology, for instance, if I think of a figure like von Monaco or Goldstein, actually the idea of neuroplasticity was something more radical. Was the idea that the brain was continuously, like Kader does in his research on the collective mind, the mind is continuously in a process of healing. So healing does not come after a trauma. It's basically the modus operandi of your brain, but also this traumatic experience, so to speak, or a capacity to indeed heal a trauma, it's basically present. This is the theory of that age, of that model of neuroplasticity I find very radical. So basically, neurologists like Kurt Goldstein conceived this idea that the brain produces every moment micro catastrophic reaction, micro traumatic reaction, basically as a modus operandi. And this is a very complex idea that had an incredible influence also on French philosophy, on Canguilhem, even on Foucault. You should check the first book by Foucault on this matter. And interesting enough, cyberneticians like Wiener absorbed it. And Wiener already in 1948, in his book on cybernetics, was already referring to the psychopathologies of machine, but thinking of basically trying to conceive self-repairing machines, like in the tradition that already had at the time, the idea that already had at the time of learning machine, but also machine that could self-repair. That intuition had somehow an important influence because the first artificial neural network were designed as self-organizing machine, as machine able of self-organization, trying to imitate this capacity of self-organization. But my interest in it is not technophilic. I'm not into this aspect of cybernetics. I want to understand these ideas they had, but I'm interested indeed in alternative models of our mind and alternative philosophy of the mind, but also to recover a sort of philosophy of mind based on potentiality, so to speak, on continuous capacity of the brain to invent, to organize its own catastrophe, if you allow me to say that, rather than a brain, a subject that has to be always considered a victim of some system of oppression. So that, I don't know if I answer Mariana, but for me, this notion of trauma has been an influential notion, and one day maybe we should organize a conference only on that to show how this idea influenced both French philosophy and psychiatry up to Deleuze and Guattari, and both cybernetics and actually the genealogy of artificial neural networks and machine learning.
Yeah, thank you, Matteo. It was very interesting. I mean, for me, the concept of trauma is also, like you, I've been quite very much interested by neuroplasticity, particularly the work of Catherine Malabou. And there are so many, I would say, traumas possible from the brain to physically to psychologically. That has an impact physically. And but they are also, I would say, following the work I did a couple of years ago regarding the phantom limb you were mentioning before, I've been very interested by the fact that the way the individual as a psychological and fleshy entity deal with trauma has nothing to do with the society as through this collective individuation, basically. And I think what today interests me much more is how much we can link the impact of this accident in a politics governance, because there is a total absence by from the governance, the political governance on the care of this question of the trauma. For instance, if we think about the way that the people have been, students, for instance, traumatized with the COVID lockdowns, it's insane how much the society we live in take for granted that this is okay. And therefore, for me, the question of trauma and its consequences, whether it comes from an individual or group into the society, is something we definitely should care, because most of the time is related to political orientation and or misunderstandings, for instance, when people are clearly behaving as fascist and they are convinced that they are not, for instance. This is, for me, this talking about La Colonie and the community, this illustrates how much we need conversation, we need collective individuation, we need to speak about trauma. We need to, I remember that I had so many people at La Colonie who came to say, no, colonialism was great, what are you talking about? And I am a left person. So it's like you could be, you know, left 70% and 20% right and 10% far right, but because you are 70%, you are convinced that what you are saying, it makes sense. And I think the most interesting was like when, because I did also discuss with some of them, and they were clearly people who have been, for instance, colonizers who were living in Algeria and have been have grown up there. And after the independence, they have to leave Algeria, and they could never go back. So they've been traumatized by this part of their history that has disappeared. You have also the same thing in Germany with GDR, people who have grown up in the GDR and who they were like convinced that a revolution was happening. But then 10 years after, they discovered that capitalism has transformed their society, you know, bringing shitty insurance contracts and things like that, closing the factories. I think almost 7,000 factories have been closed in the former GDR. I think for me, what interests me with the notion of trauma, because it's endless, it's huge, is definitely how we can connect the injuries produced by the accident into politics, and then basically as a tool for some politician to take over the population. You know what I mean?
Thank you. We have a short clarification question that maybe we can just get to. I'll just read it. Yves Medler is wondering what the software was that you mentioned, Kader. Was maybe Kleros?
Kleros, yeah. I think it's a company that provides a software. You want clarification on Kleros? I can send you the link.
Maybe you can just put the name in the chat. I think that would be enough.
Don't be scared by the website because it's really like, but it's important to see it.
Thank you. And then we have a question that is on neuroplasticity and the social brain by an artist who works with MIT Dream Lab, Agnieszka. Thanks for joining. Would you like to pose your question?
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you for this fantastic conversation. I'm really interested in these questions of neuroplasticity, plasticity, but of a social brain, and the kind of digital PTSD in general. And I think that there is this kind of new field, at least to me, that has only been researched recently, and I've been trying to work with it a little bit, which is basically for the moment secret. It's not really open use of various algorithms by corporations to kind of survey dreams, to basically, essentially, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people started posting information about what they dreamt about, especially, of course, the dreams intensified during the pandemic. And obviously, corporations saw an opportunity in it, and they started looking for patterns, and through pattern recognition, amassing great amounts of data. They are already seeing patterns in the unconscious. It's ridiculous. But of course, I'm interested in it also historically. So, for example, there are precedences, which I'm sure you are, at least Kader, are aware of, like, for example, Charles Gabriel Seligman, who was collecting this like dreams about from various populations, indigenous populations, like in Sri Lanka. And of course, there is a continuation of this kind of data normalization of dream content. But at the same time, until this point, yes, it was data, but there was no potential no possibility of analyzing this beyond some kind of obviously very biased categorizations that happened within colonial governance. But now what is really happening, which is really perverse, is that now corporations are starting to deploy this algorithms that parse and and categorize this like millions of dreams. And of course, there's no official data about this, but I was able to access a lot of like unofficial. So for example, some companies already become vocal about it. For example, Coors Beer during the Super Bowl, actually they sort of hijacked illegally some of the research that we were doing at the MIT Dream Lab around this. And they are starting to deploy it to be able to somehow produce content that could have an impact on the dreams that people will have. So of course, this is kind of revisiting of this superstitious traditions of like subliminal messages, which was obviously kind of nonsensical. But actually right now, there is a point to it because they are, well, scientifically understanding how dreams work and analyzing these millions of dreams and trying to understand what people, what are the patterns in the unconscious, in the collective unconscious, and how this could be addressed through these, through advertising, obviously, for example. But for me, it's interesting from the point of view, of course, how can we use this algorithms or whatever is already there, unfortunately, that is being used to essentially colonialize our collective unconscious, but how can we use it to instead understand what are the, you know, what are the collective fears, what are the collective problems, traumas of the collective unconscious, and how this could be healed. So I'm curious, you know, like, what is your opinion about this? And yeah, in relationship, of course, with the questions of how the collective brain, the social brain is undergoing plasticity in relation to the individual plasticities. And I've been having conversations about it with both Bifo Berardi and Catherine Malabou. So, but I'm really curious what your stance is here. Thank you.
Thanks, Agnieszka. Sounds creepy what you just mentioned. I didn't know. I posted in the chat a link to some MIT Dream Lab. I hope it's the correct one. I hope is it.
This is my project at MIT.
Okay,
yes.
good. So I mean, I was
yes,
right.
Perfect. It's a, well, actually, to explain the title, it relates also to the kind of collection.
But one of the questions I want to mention, Kader, if you don't mind, very briefly. That indeed today we talk about data, we talk about data extractivism, but we should also clarify sometimes what this, you know, new functionaries of data bureaucracies do with data, because we never clarify with mathematical operation are performed on this data. And this mathematical operation are very simple and very reductivist, I would say. So one of the things that is striking to me, we can collect, you know, large data set of dreams, and we operate, you know, forms of pattern recognition. But basically what we go and try to build are statistical correlations. And so we have to also to analyze what does it mean this. And statistical correlation, machine learning algorithm do this basically. They are a very simple statistical technique, and it has incredible limits. So it's a very reductivist approach. And what they do, indeed, they compress large chunk of information to smaller models, smaller representation. But what for me is striking is the episteme of correlation. That is one technique of reading data, maybe among others. And that is very simple. As I said, it started actually with craniometry at the end of the 19th century, where they were trying to measure two dimensions, you know, the size of your skull and your intelligence. They were the two coordinates to correlate. And today with this data sets of you know, cultural heritage, newspaper, tweets, whatever, you can put whatever you want there. We go and repeat the same, but I think there are limits in this in these tools and techniques to read the collective mind, like to read the collective heritage. They can be powerful, but they have intrinsic mathematical limits. So that's what I would react to. First, is really this the way to read our collective mind? Is it an efficient way? So that would be my first comment. This capacity to read but I have to check this website, Agnieszka, more in detail.
I mean, it sounds very interesting. Yeah, I agree, Agnieszka and Matteo, that we could wonder whether this capacity to read, considering that algorithmic governance is a process of ranking based on stats. So when they pretend to be predictive, they are just like proposing an average of translation possible. I think what scares me more is that I really think, again, like Stigler, that the need for the de-automatization of the dream is because our dreams are also controlled by this governance. And through this, activation of the pro-attention process that is actually the result of accumulation of memory. And there's one thing that also Stigler said beautifully. He is comparing actually he took it from a French neurologist whose name is Daniel Nakache, I think. The idea that the brain basically is like a cinema, is like a movie theater. Is every night when you sleep, you have an invisible projectionist who is like projecting the film of your dream. And I think that there is a kind of there's something interesting here in terms of how cinema for Bernard Stiegler could have been invented one day or another, because the human nature is already producing cinema within dreams.
Can I make a small comment?
Yeah, so I think sorry.
If I can make a very small comment that I think is super interesting that you brought this up, the cinema, because another thing that I think we should bring up in this conversation is how also the collection about the data of the audiences by platforms such as Netflix and Amazon is potentially going to change what is cinema in the future, because right now what viewers want to watch or just what they are watching and how long they are watching, all this is collected, and it's already influencing how new, very commercial for the moment, productions are made. But of course, this could also be used in a non-commercial way, but for the moment, it's just exploiting this collective, unconscious of the audiences.
Yeah, but what I found interesting in your comment before is the question of how could we stand against, how could we really de-automatize our dreams? Because for the cold beer brand, what has happened here is like surveillance capitalism always started with advertising company, but the end of this is actually military administration. So the stake of this is not only being guinea pigs for the beer industry, but is that from being guinea pigs we will become how do you call that, prototype, because the aim of this process is that it makes you in a Pavlovian way, reacting, then producing certain dreams that will bring profit for the capitalism. And I think the question, as far as I'm concerned, that is extremely interesting is the notion of slowing time, because try to remember about your dream. We do not dream with the same times. I always quote this dream I read a couple of years ago. It was a man, I don't remember in which book I read this in France, but he was dreaming that he was an aristocrat during the French Revolution, and he has been arrested, and then they have condemned him, and then the guillotine, he was condemned to be beheaded by the guillotine. When the guillotine fell on his neck, he woke up and he has actually the frame of the bed on his neck. So from the accident of the frame of the bed that fell on his neck, the brain has produced all these dreams that last like 10 years or 6 or 1 year at least. And I think what is interesting is to start to wonder what kind of time is the temporality of the dream, and how much it can help us maybe to just like stand against this crazy acceleration. I also do think that I'm not speaking here because we speak a lot with philosophers today in a Bergsonian way of you move even by staying in the same position because of time, but I'm just rather I would say trying to evoke the surrealism project of finding in here the contrary of de-automatization, because they have called it automatic writings, automatic drawings, like the cadaver exquis, for instance, these drawings that were made with piece that nobody knew what was the next. I think what we should really invest in is this notion of reappropriation of our dreams through a reappropriation of the diversity of times we can really develop in our dreams, and therefore we could escape to this much needed speed governance of extractions of value by surveillance capitalism.
Thank you, Kader. It's getting a bit late. We promised to be already done.
Thank you.
There is a small clarification here from Ludmila about the difference of dream and dreaming, which I think is very insightful. And maybe you would like to react to that briefly, Kader, if you want. And also we have a question by Katharina Weinstock.
Yeah.
Which, Katharina, would you like to join us and pose your question?
Maybe by microphone.
And let's see.
Can you unmute Katharina?
Right. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this. I'm trying not to take up too much time. Hi, Kader, nice to see you again. I remember when you first prepared, I think your first show at Galerie Nagel in Berlin, I was an intern there. You won't remember, but I do. So my question, I'm not sure if it really fits in, but it's just something that's relevant to me as one of Matteo's colleagues here at HfG Karlsruhe. You know, we're a university which brings together art and theory in a quite unique way, at least in the university landscape of Germany. And so I think a lot about artistic research being like the art form of the day in some way. So this question regards methodologies, like the genealogy of arts methodologies. I feel like with the current challenges, like the digital transformation of public and political spheres, climate change, and so on, we're really facing great challenges. And I feel like there's a big need for artists to really get in touch with reality. I think you also said that in your practice, it's activist, and you want to have like an influence or like an impact beyond the walls of the museum, obviously. So there is this need. However, methodologies are kind of unclear, and it, like artistic research, I think still runs the risk of being this like theory light or theory-tainment, you know, kind of light, playful, you know, and also it might even be dangerous to bring in the realm of imagination when factuality, reliable data are so important in order to convince people of what's going on and how important it is that we need to act. And there's like, as an art historian, I think that this new emerging art form owes a lot to 1990s trends. I'm thinking of Hal Foster writing about the archival impulse. Also, even more tricky, the artist as ethnographer, you know, fieldwork as a practice. And I feel like in these art forms, fieldwork is still very important, but it hasn't really been resolved, that also that kind of tricky connection to these kind of naive 1990s trends. I'm just wondering, and this is a very basic general question, which methods you would advise to use, or if you have any, you know, ideas on like guidelines, how to make good contemporary artistic research art, maybe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ari. Thank you, Katharina, and also Ludmila. I would say there are two interesting questions here. Maybe Matteo, we can share, and you answer to one of them, and I can answer to one of them. I like the one of Ludmila, if you want me to answer on this. but well, I like the one of Katarina too, so I'm going to try to make it quick. Okay, Ludmila, she's asking for a small clarification of the concept of dream by differentiating dreamings, which I think it's very relevant because the dreaming has a long history. You are referring to Russian and Eastern Europe Slavic language, but even from Australia, the Aborigine people have been practicing the dreaming as a process to be indeed semi-conscious and I remember that Guattari was very much into this experience, and there's an interesting example from Félix Guattari, who used to go twice a week outside of Paris to teach, and he discovered that one day when he was driving, I know by Jean-Jacques Lebel, who is a close friend, that Guattari was mad about driving. He was addicted to driving. He loved driving. I have many anecdotes. So one day while driving on his, weekly ritual, he had to stop because the kid was crossing the street. And he really pay attention to this moment that we have all known by car or by bike. By bike is a bit dangerous, where actually your mind leave away, but you are still here. And I think what is important here to understand in this dreaming is the fact that Félix Guattari really took it as a sort of merge between him and the machine, the car, where basically when you are driving, you become part of the car, what Gilbert Simondon has called milieu associé, an associated field and I think what is interesting in this question of dreaming is that first, it's not this selfish sort of almost neoliberal, I'm dreaming and me, myself and I, and now I'm free, I can dream. It's not that. A dream is a collective dream. It's a collective dream with your milieu. Stigler, in his Automate Society, also quotes something that I will never forget. He said, before anything, a thought, a thinking, political, poetical, is a dream. And what a description I gave at the beginning of the way that computational governance is hijacking the pretension by basically adding other pretension, so erasing the next one endlessly, and producing a subject that is exploited basically through addiction and transforming the desire of the subject into addiction and sorry, I missed the other aspect, is actually alienating, exactly like colonialism. Fanon has been proceeding by the alienation of the other to a dream, actually. So I think what is important is that it's not a selfish dream. It's almost an activist dream, but thinking through a collective individuation. This is what I would like to say. And regarding the method, Katarina, I will. Matteo, you want to say something?
Oh, please, Kader. I think Katarina's question is very important also.
Yes, but again, I would say that in my opinion, it's very difficult to define a method. To be honest, for good decolonial, critical, contemporary, artistic research, because basically the difficulty that we have with the decolonial conversation, and this is my opinion, is that too many conversations have been focusing on questions of religion, of race, of genders, but not on classes. I think it's extremely important to bring back, and I'm quoting here actually Eldridge Cleaver, that you might know, because I'm not inventing something. This was said by Eldridge Cleaver in Algiers in 1970. I really invite you to watch this film by William Klein. the need to reorient the decolonial conversation into a class conversation, because the problem of the contemporaneity of the coloniality is capitalism, and it's we have been speaking about this the whole hour and a half now, is this incredible capacity that Stigler has named the quasi-causality of capitalism, a system that is able to reappropriate its own disaster as granted and as an interest. So for me, the most interesting is what I said before. I would say, quoting Abdelkabir Khatibi, is the need to decolonize yourself. I think this is very important. I'm not saying it's difficult. I'm saying we have to do it. You need to hack yourself. And on the other hand, I think that this question of reorienting the decolonial conversation toward basically a class struggle conversation is, I hope, what will be the sort of aftermath of all this conversation we have had the last 10 years.
Thanks, Kader. If Arif allows me, maybe I make final remarks. And we take this idea of class struggle, the centrality of class struggle, Kader, also as a methodological suggestion for Katerina, discussing the method of artist practice. I mean, this is not a joke. I would like maybe to conclude, go back to, indeed, because you mentioned this issue of what is called today intersectionality, right? And this term that is pretty new, but a critical theory, social movement have been always intersectional since the beginning. And I would like to go back to the fact that indeed, before today's regime of data governance, algorithmic governance, and surveillance capitalism, working class movement, feminist movement, and decolonial struggles have been producing their own epistemologies, from the working class struggles of the 19th century, historical materialism, but forms of historical epistemologies emerge. And women's movement since the 60s and the 70s stressed the need of a feminist epistemology that was necessary to criticize mechanical thinking, the making of modern science, and so on. And decolonial struggles outside Europe, and you mentioned many authors, Kader, that I think can fall in this tradition, have been questioning, the epistemologies of the West, the psychoanalysis, the psychiatry that was exported to their countries, and they indeed took the models of the mind as a battleground. So I think these three trajectories that I simplify in these three trajectories, but probably the scenario should be more articulated, for me are examples of also forms of counter epistemologies that we have to reinvent, rediscover, rediscuss to counter that kind of big epistemological project that is, for instance, today artificial intelligence. And so I take this invitation to go back to the issue of class, that issue of class segregation for the purpose of capitalist extraction, as a sort of idea to conceptualize indeed other forms of knowledge production. I know it's a bit of an abstract conclusion, but Kader, maybe I leave to you the last thought for today.
Well, I think it's abstract, but it's also a conclusion has to be abstract at some point, because it brings us to other horizons. And I really appreciate that you actually conclude with me on this question, that in the end, what we are talking about, what we are concerning by, is this derivative of capitalism. And since modern capitalism, basically since 5 centuries, is like in this quasi-causal process, constantly taking for granted its own destructions. And I think, I really hope that we take this seriously. And then to finish with, regarding what you said about feminism, and I invite, there are many scholars I've been thinking with, Françoise Vergès. I was speaking recently with Margarita Tsomu from Athens. I think the question of the civilization as a concept, completely patriarchal, is something that also affect the digital governance in many complex aspects that we cannot develop now. But I think this, I think what Rolando Vazquez also said in his book Vista of Modernity, probably, Matteo, what we really have to understand today in terms of what is coloniality and what kind of solution we can have to stand against it. I'm not pretending that I have them, but we need to understand how this works. It works from an enunciation that came from a locus where the colonizer, the power is invisible. You are the black, you are the Arabs, you are the Jews, you are the gays, you are the woman, but this entity is never really defined, which is basically the white male European society subject, I have to say. So I think maybe this conclusion bring us to another conversation where we can invite also colleagues who are working on this. I think it would be great.
Thanks, Kader. We take this as an invitation to continue this series of conversations and colloquia. Hopefully we can hold these conversations in person. Kader, thanks so much for your time. And I would like to leave actually the last greetings to Arif. And I would like to thank everyone that came and had the patience to stay with us. And maybe we'll find other ways to exchange ideas and debate. Thanks again, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, also for asking questions in the chat and for tuning in briefly. Thank you, Matteo, for initiating, and Kader for joining. I think seeing the limited time that we had, you managed to make a very good ellipsis, and I'm looking forward to the next one. Thank you all, and we hope to publish the recording, by the way, on our website.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good evening.